Hello. So my name is Charles. I work here at Blackshear Place Library, and today I'd like to talk with you about the graphic novel Watchmen, which is available on Hoopla. It is for mature audiences, and the three things I'd like to talk with you today about it is number one, Watchmen represents a kind of evolutionary development in the idea of superheroes. Came out in 1986, changed a lot of ways in which people thought about superheroes and helped advance the idea. Number two, there are multiple layers of storytelling involved in Watchmen as a graphic novel and as a way of understanding comics. That itself is very fascinating for me. And number three, what I think is very special about Watchmen is that it quite simply respects the autonomy of the reader. It allows you, the reader, to decide what you make out of the story. And so those are the three things that we're going to talk about today. So let's get started on it. So, what is a superhero? If you look at just the classic ideas of what a superhero is, it's usually a person that's undergone a rapid transformation to becoming very powerful, very smart, or just very rich and wealthy, and they use their talents and skills and access to materials to create really cool suits like Iron Man, or Batman even. What Watchmen does with this idea of a superhero is present them as more the human side of what it is to be a superhuman, exploring ideas of how it is that superheroes do differ from us as ordinary people. One of the things that you'll notice when you're reading Watchmen is the way in which ordinary people are presented. They're usually very superstitious, they're very fearful, they're either in self-denial, or they're succumb to various vices. Superheroes, on the other hand, being presented that they're pretty much like humans, they themselves have scars from their past, they have talents that are unlike anything. But what really happens in Watchmen that's really important is that one of the superheroes becomes effectively a god, Doc Manhattan. He's able to manipulate time and space with his mind and his choice. He's able to explode people if he wants, or he's able to reconnect, like pour out liquid onto a table, for example. He's able to bring it all back and put it into a beaker. These ideas that you have with a superhero is someone who has unlimited access to power. If they have the same kinds of faults and problems that ordinary people do, what does all that power do for them in their own lives? Does it help them to become better, more successful? Does it help them to think about their problems in a way where they can solve it judiciously or with wisdom? And the interesting thing is that I think Watchmen is suggesting that it's not necessarily the case. Power is not what makes people better. You really can't punch someone into justice or kick them into the truth. People have to come to these things on their own. They have to make their own decisions about what's right and what's wrong. But because of that, if we give people power and they don't know what's right and what's wrong, well then, isn't that the world that we have now? Number two, the many layered aspects of the storytelling. So one of the things that is very obvious about the way that Watchmen tells its story is that it has many different layers to the story that it commences. There's the main narrative that opens with the killing of someone you don't even know yet. And as you begin investigating that story, all these other little stories get told in terms of flashbacks, narratives at the end of chapters, or even a story that gets told within the context of all the rest of the story, interweaved, interlacing all these different little stories together to give you a full picture. It may not be the entire picture, but you have to figure out what those pictures represent in terms of the story itself. It's a very fascinating way in which this tells stories, but if you're already used to comics and you're already used to the way that graphic novels tell stories, you're probably already going to get used to this. But if you're not at all used to it, it's a way of at least branching out and seeing new ways of telling stories. Watchmen, I think, does a very good job of doing that. Okay, so one of the stories in Watchmen is The Tale of the Black Freighter. Now, The Tale of the Black Freighter is a comic within the comic, and it's a horror story about a stranded man who believes that the pirates who had sank his ship are actually on their way to the hometown that he's from. And so stranded on this island, he begins to try to get back home so he can save his wife and children, because the pirates, he believes, are on their way to his hometown to rape, murder, destroy all the people of that city. So he needs to go and protect them. So what he does is he begins to build a raft to get back home. But he has to use the bloated corpses of the people that died with him there on that island. So there's a lot of description of how he has to rig up the bodies underneath the raft, and then he sets sail. And of course he gets attacked by birds, he gets attacked by a giant shark, and even has to kill the shark, and then uses the corpse of the shark to even take the boat even further all the way in. Very, very graphic kind of story. But the thing that's interesting about it is that as he begins to become more savage, more cruel and inhuman, you can see that he's justifying every step that he's taking to himself and to us, the reader of the story. As the story goes, the stranded survivor who's made his way all the way back to the hometown finds out that he's mistaken. And the pirates, well, he finds out that they weren't ready to rape, murder, and destroy the town. So then what do all these different layers in the Watchmen story try to tell you? Well, they're not really trying to tell you anything in particular. What it does show is that there's no privileged position within the story. There's no definite character who is the protagonist. There's multiple protagonists. The story follows different characters, whether they themselves are the heroes or the villains. In a sense, you have to figure that out on the basis of how you read Watchmen. And that's what I think makes it for a very interactive reading. It's not something that you can just sit there passively and entertain yourself with. In a movie, you can just sit there and watch and just smile at what's happening. But when you're reading, it takes a while for you to put all the ideas together in your head. And even if a visual presentation is there on a page, you still have to, in some sense, see what's behind the image. There's lots of mirrors and reflections taking place in the story, lots of symmetries and symbols like that. So you have to see all the different layers and perspectives by, in some sense, allowing yourself the possibility of shifting your own perspective. And that's what I think becomes very interesting about Watchmen in that shift from hero to villain, or villain to hero, is that your perspective really does make a huge difference. So if that's true, what are we doing today in our own lives to switch perspectives? So then what does it mean to be a superhero? Ordinarily today, we think of our heroes as police officers, firefighters, maybe today doctors, nurses, people on these front lines, as they call them. In Watchmen, heroes are presented as larger than life. In fact, Dr. Manhattan is so powerful, he even suggests that he's a god. And one of the ways in which the novel itself plays with this idea is challenging us to think about superheroes in this way. Is this idea that God is real and he's American. And asking the kind of questions about what we expect our heroes to be, how we expect them to be godlike and solve the world's problems. It goes back to one of the things that we were talking before about heroes. Can you really punch the world into peace? Can you really bomb it into safety? A lot of folks think that they can, but Watchmen in its different stories is challenging that very idea. And if it comes down to that with humans, then what does it mean then about God? There are several characters in Watchmen that just outright say that there is no God, that what they've seen as being on the front lines is the horror and depravity of humans against each other, what they are capable of doing, whether they're able to launch nuclear bombs and annihilate entire countrysides, or take small children and butcher them and feed them to dogs. The horrible things that we humans are capable of doing. If you had to deal with that day in and day and day and day, what does it make you out to be? But one of the things that is important about the narrative, in posing this question not just about God's existence, but about us humans, our own condition for depravity, our own condition for cruelty. How do we see the miracle today? How do we come to believe in it? One of the things that Watchmen is suggesting is that it is simply that shift in perspective to see everything as if it's new is what enables us to breathe again, what enables us to have a chance to stop and a chance to change for peace. You might live in a world that feels very hopeless when people around you are either dying or close to it. But if there's an opportunity for us to stop what we do, the things that lead us to midnight, then maybe we can change. And maybe that change comes from something within ourselves, of being able to turn and see something new, or notice something, maybe in the background. Which brings us to number 3, you, the reader. What do you want your heroes to be like? What do you want your heroes to save? Do you want them to save you? Well, then that's a dark question, isn't it? Are you worth saving? That's one of the things about Watchmen, is that it poses this question in a way that's very challenging, because it's not about heroes always being right. Sometimes our heroes do things that we can question. And I think it's what's really good about Watchmen as a story about superheroes, is that it gets us, the reader, to sort of think through these things for ourselves. What do I think about justice? And what do I think about the truth? If I found out that my life as it is based upon numerous lie after numerous lie, then am I courageous enough to peel back all of those untruths, to get to the bedrock of it, and find out that I am not who I thought I was? If I could do that with the rest of the world, would I really want to do that? Well, I work in a library, and what I'm doing is introducing people to books, introducing them to stories that I've read, that other people have read, that hopefully at some point you'll read too. Hopefully you yourself, in reading these stories, will come to their own conclusions, and maybe, given time, read it again and see how you've changed in your thinking, see how you've changed in your heart and your feelings about matters. Above all, that's what makes for a great read, something that not only challenges you now, but later and later and later, if there is one. But there's going to be, because there's always hope when there are heroes. So thank you. I'll probably do another one, a couple of these. Yeah, maybe.